Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Now, at first, when the medical team would get the results of Hisashi's stem cell transplant, they were over the moon as his immune system was slowly building up, and they would go to double check and make sure that everything was okay. And it was just like, a gleaming ray of hope, and then quickly followed by a kick to the gut, where they would go in and check and find out that 10% of Hisashi's sister's cells were actually damaged by radiation. And it just made no sense to the doctors. They were really scratching their heads because it just made no sense. And, as I said in the last video, it essentially would be like someone receiving a wound from a pew-pew and then would go to do a transplant of the body part that was wounded. And after doing that healthy transplant and putting it in, it would just magically get a pew-pew wound. It just made no sense whatsoever. Now, by October 28th, 1999, Hisashi had actually been alive for 29 days since the exposure. And it's around this time that they would also start flying in researchers to not only help assist with Hisashi, but also to study Hisashi as well. It was imperative for researchers to just learn everything they could about Hisashi's condition. They were going to do everything in their power to save Hisashi. That was the main concern for the medical team. But not only were the researchers going to help with Hisashi, but it was also imperative to study his condition for many reasons. For one, as I just said, no one had lasted that long with that type of exposure. The last person that would have something relatively close to that exposure would only last about 9 days, and Hisashi would last 20 days more than that. So they really wanted to kind of study for that aspect. And the other reason to study Hisashi was so that for future cases and greater exposure of radiation, they could be more prepared for that type of situation. It should be noted that they would at least say, well, if we can't at least save him, we can at least take what we have learned here so that other people can possibly be saved. And it's around this time that another problem would arise with Hisashi. Around the time that the researchers were coming in, the medical team would find that there was microglobin in Hisashi's bloodstream. Microglobin is typically protein found within the muscles. And it is true that sometimes we get microglobin in our blood, but not to the extent that he was receiving. And the doctors were afraid that he may be suffering from a condition called crush syndrome. Crush syndrome is typically when people are in an event where a building or heavy debris falls on top of them, and that piece of debris would actually crush a certain body part. I can't really show on here the examples of crush syndrome as the pictures are extremely graphic. But essentially, when that piece of debris or whatever falls onto that particular part of the body and they're pulled out, that part that was crushed would crush all the muscles, and it would squeeze the microglobin proteins into the bloodstream. And when it clumps together like that, it can actually clog the kidneys and create kidney failure. So this was a really big concern for the medical team. And typically, as I said, most people do have microglobin proteins in their blood, but it's typically around 69 milliliters, and Hisashi had over 1,000. So what did this mean? Well, what this meant for the medical team is that not only was the radiation obliterating his DNA and his chromosomes to where he can't develop cells, not only is his body burning from the radiation on the side that he was standing closest to the exposure, not only had the radiation came and decimated his entire digestive system, but it had actually gotten to the point where the radiation was not just eroding his physical outside body, it was liquefying his muscles and insides on the inside of his body. This is where I'm going to talk from personal experience. So his body is actively necrotic. It's actively decaying, and it is being liquefied from the inside out. That aspect is not from personal experience. There was at this time a Russian doctor on the team that would suggest around this time that, okay, if it's the right arm that was eroded and radiated, and that is the side that the radiation is liquefying, let's just amputate the limb that's causing this. And typically, that would be the correct response. Being from someone who's an amputee, if you have a part of your body that is necrotic and infecting the healthy parts of your body, you have to remove the problem. The problem was not so much about amputating the limb, it was about the fact that because of his immune system and his low platelets, they cannot amputate his arm. Because if they were afraid of a minor scratch having him bleed to Smith, then an amputated limb was almost a guarantee. Now also keep in mind that they had a lot of these machines hooked up to Hisashi where they were consistently pumping in not only drugs, but protein, nutrients, fluids, and it's around this time that Hisashi started having diarrhea or these very runny bowel movements. And it is basically those liquefied parts of the microglobin that he is passing through his body. Now, also because they're pumping liquids inside of him to keep him alive, he's also flushing those fluids out. And it's around this time that his body would start collecting these boils, and they would pus and explode and they would leak. So now he has these open areas outside of his body. So if these liquids weren't liquefying through his diarrhea, they were actively just running out of his body. And it's around this time he just had things just running all over his body, and like whether through bowel movement or just outside. This is actually a picture of Hisashi's back, and just to give you an example on how bad it was. It's around this time that they would notice that all the fluids that Hisashi was secreting out of his body, that he was losing about 3 liters of fluids a day. So they really had to find a way to keep those fluids from just leaking consistently out. So they would actually, typically, because of the amount of skin that he had lost, they would typically do a skin graft. And they can't really cut any parts of his skin off because of his platelets, so they would actually begin gauzing up his body as a way to keep these fluids out. It's said that the medical team would spend 3 hours a day, every single day, changing his dressings. Keep in mind here, the entire time he's losing about 3 liters of fluids a day. So these doctors would have to change them every single day. The other problem is because he had lost most of his skin, he could not incubate heat. He couldn't maintain like a body temperature. So while they were changing his dressings every single day, they would have to turn up the temperature in the room to about 86 degrees. So these doctors and nurses that are constantly changing his dressing every day have to do it not only in a speedy way because it's really hot and they would get exhausted, but at the same time they had to be careful not to squeeze his muscles because he really didn't have much muscles left. They would actually wrap so much of Hisashi that the only exposed areas on Hisashi's body would actually be around his eyes, on the tip of his toes. And it's around this time that Hisashi's wife would look at Hisashi and go, "Look, now there's nowhere we can touch him."